it's just a lot easier now to have that funding added to your plan. And then high cost is anything that's over $5,000. So these are usually complex items. They need specialised knowledge. Sometimes they have to be custom made. So you may need to do a trial for these items first, and then a full AT assessment, and also one, maybe two quotes as well. So it's a bit more complicated to get the higher cost items. So not everyone's aware of this, but these are some other items that you can ask for funding to be added to the plan. So assistive technology rental and trials, delivery costs for assistive technology, setting up costs, maintenance costs, and repairs. So you can ask for funding to be added for those things, so that if that comes up during the plan, you have some extra funding available for those items. So there's been a change with the new government coming in. Instead of a plan review, it's now called a plan reassessment. They're actually doing less plan reassessments now because they're trying to offer people longer plans. So people are being offered 2- and 3-year plans. It was recognised that doing a full plan review every 12 months was very stressful for people. And so now they're trying to make plans longer. So there's a longer length of time between plan reviews, and it also means that you're not having to get progress reports every 12 months, which chews through funding. So but it's now called a plan reassessment, which is really the same thing. There hasn't really been much of a change in the actual process, but as I mentioned previously, my strong recommendation is anytime you have a plan reassessment now, that you do a functional capacity assessment beforehand through an OT. And then if you aren't happy with the outcome of the plan reassessment, then the next step is to request an internal review. So it has to be lodged within 3 months of the plan start date. And that's just the examples of how you can request an internal review. And so my tips for preparing for an internal review, you can make a PIA request. In the past, they used to suggest doing a Freedom of Information request, but you can now do a Participant Information Access request, and that seems to be a bit more streamlined process, and you can be very specific about the information that you're wanting them to share. So, for example, you can ask for all the information at the plan review meeting, what was passed on to the delegate that approved the funding, and then how did the delegate come to their decisions. So so that I think that should be the first step, so that you can get a better understanding of what was actually presented and why, how the delegate came to their decisions. I'd recommend speaking to an advocate. I'm not sure how things are over East. I know in WA it's very, very difficult to get an advocate who has availability, but it's definitely better to have one on board. Be really clear about what it is you're asking to be considered. So, if they only funded 20 hours of speech therapy and you really think that there should be 40 hours, you need to be really specific about what you believe, what supports are missing from the plan, or what the decision is that you don't agree with. And then you need really clear, solid evidence for all of the things that you're asking to be reconsidered in the plan. And also to be clear about the budgets that you don't want changed. So being really specific about, like, I agree with this part of the plan, but I don't agree with this part of the plan. This is what I want reviewed. And then once you've submitted the internal review request, an NDIS delegate will be allocated to your case. In the past, there would always be a phone meeting with that delegate, but for some reason they've change that, and that you don't always get a call. Sometimes you just get told what the outcome is. But if they do contact you and ask, and say that they want to ask you a few questions, I would really recommend having a support person added to the call, ideally an advocate or support coordinator, but if not, just a family member or someone who can verify what was discussed in the phone conversation. And then from that, they will make a decision, and you'll receive a letter explaining the outcome, and you may receive a new plan. Sometimes even if they decline your application, they may still issue a new plan. Actually, I think that's only if they decline equipment applications. I think with internal review, if they decline everything, the plan just stays in place, I'm pretty sure. But if they agree to some small change, then anything that's added to the plan will generate a new plan. And then if you're not happy with the outcome of the internal review, the next step is to request an external review, which is an application to the AAT. They will reconsider everything and make a determination. You have to make the request within 28 days. So once you get written notice of the internal review decision, you have to make a request within 28 days. And you don't have to submit anything. All you have to do is complete the form and say that you want an external review. And then from there, they will set up a conference hearing. Usually there's quite a process before it would get to an official AAT hearing. What they try to do is it's kind of, I guess, similar to mediation. They just try to come to an agreement between all parties. It is a very long and drawn out process, and people do find it really stressful. But the plus is that often you'll get a good outcome, and usually get a much better plan, or the plan that closer to what you were hoping for in the first place. It's just a very long, drawn out process. That's the downside. So in the past, a change of circumstances review could actually happen any time within the plan, but generally the first 3 months of a plan is the time frame that you have to do an internal review, and then 100 days before the end of the plan, you can request an early plan review any time in that time period. So a change of situation would usually happen after the first 3 months or before 100 days from the end of the plan. It used to be called change of circumstances. They've now changed it to change of situation, and there is actually a new form, and I actually like the new form, and I've never said that about an NDIS form before, but it's very clear and easy to understand, and I do really like the new form. Basically this can be used at any time that the current plan isn't meeting the needs of the person with a disability. Like it might be that their support needs have changed, or their family situation has changed, or they're moving, like they might be leaving school, or there's some other change in their life that's happened, and their plan that they've got no longer meets their needs. And so you can fill in a change of situation. It basically triggers a plan reassessment. So that's a mechanism. And I often tell people about this too, so when you go to your plan review, they offer you 2 or 3 year plans. People get a bit nervous about whether or not they should agree to that, because they worry that, well, what if it's not the right plan, or what if in a year or two's time things change? But this is the reassurance that, it's like you can actually put in for a change of situation at any time. So you don't have to necessarily wait to the end of that plan before asking for additional supports. So it's a bit of a reassurance that, you know, it's fine to ask for a longer plan because you do have this as a fallback. So once you request a change of situation, NDIA have to agree that there has been a change, and then once they agree to that, then they will do what's called an unscheduled plan review meeting, which just means they do a full plan reassessment, but it's not at the time that you should have had your end of plan review. But it is exactly the same as an end of plan review. So the preparation is the same. There's a getting ready for your plan review document. That's not compulsory, but it's a good idea to fill that in. Update your carer pack and statement, get some support letters from specialist schools, reports from all your therapists and support workers, and any quotes for any other things that you're wanting included in the plan. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about what are some of the trends that I've been noticing in the last few months. Definitely more and more plans are being rolled over, so people are receiving letters usually around a couple of months before the end of their plans, and what that means is that they've had a look at the plan, they think that there's been good usage of the plan, and so they believe that, you know, that indicates that the current plan is meeting the needs of the participant, and so they're just offering the same plan again, which means that you don't have to have a plan reassessment meeting, and often that just means that sometimes they will auto extend the plan, and sometimes they'll give you a new plan. That's been a bit inconsistent of how they're doing that, but it's good news if you get a letter. But that you do also have, if you get the letter and you think, oh, you know what, I actually think this plan isn't going to meet the needs for the next 12 months or 2 years, you still do have the option to ask for a reassessment. But just keeping in mind that if you do that, you should get a functional capacity assessment done. Yeah, so they're definitely increasing the length of plans, so 2 and 3 year plans now. Introduction of plan variations, this is still a bit hit and miss, and I think it's because not everyone in NDIS land has had the same training, but technically what should happen with a plan variation is if you need to make some small change. So it might be maybe you've run out of support coordination funding, but everything else is fine, or it might be that you've been doing self-managing for a while, but you'd like to change to plan management, or something that's just like a small change, but you don't want a full plan review, then you should be able to ask for a plan variation. They should be able to just change that one part of the plan, and it should be fairly straightforward. It should only really take a few days for it to happen, and in some cases it does, but then I've seen other cases where it's taken 2 or 3 months where they have ended up doing a full plan review. So, you know, there's nothing really kind of consistent about the plan variations at the moment, but the hope is that down the track, when everyone gets on board and gets it right, that it is going to make life a lot easier, because you can just get small things changed rather than doing a full plan review. I have noticed that there hasn't been as many plans being cut during a full plan review, certainly not as many as there was under the previous government. It is still happening though, and it is still disheartening when it happens, because usually it happens in a big way. But I do feel like it has improved, because under the last government, I would just tell everyone to avoid everything you possibly can to do a full plan review, because yeah, pretty much everyone I knew was getting their funds cut, and then when they did the internal review, they were all being declined. Yeah, we are seeing some improvements. It's a bit slower than we all hoped, but it's slowly turning around, I think. Yeah, so this is something that I've also noticed, is that sometimes planners, when they receive an S100, which is a request for an internal review, they're contacting the participant or the participant's nominee and suggesting that they do an S48 instead, which is the change in situation. And the reason for that is because if you have an internal review and then you're not happy with that outcome, then your only recourse is to go through the tribunal, which is, you know, a long drawn out process. Whereas if you do a change in situation, you're basically getting another plan reassessment meeting to kind of start again and have everything heard in the one meeting rather than having to go down the tribunal pathway. So some delegates are coming back and saying, oh, look, you know, I think maybe not everything was taken into consideration in the plan review meeting. If we do an S48, you know, like, you know, you get a try again thing. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong, to be honest. I think it really comes down to your own energy levels and how hard you want to fight. But I just raise it because it is something that I've seen happening a bit lately. Just so that you're prepared that might be an outcome. Yeah, this is the one that does bother me quite a bit. The NDIA making a decision about internal reviews without contacting the participant. Like in the past, the participant always had the opportunity to, you know, kind of give their side of the story, but for some reason that's not always happening now, and the decisions are getting made without any contact. So yeah, I still haven't really seen what I hoped would happen under the new government is that internal reviews would start getting approved, because, you know, I think if you can provide additional evidence at the internal review phase and get a better plan, that's just the best outcome for everybody. But I haven't actually seen that happening as yet. So still got some work to do in that area. Yeah, so they're kind of the things that I've noticed in the last few months. And then, yeah, I just added some resources that people can have a look at the links later. Just a bit more information about the NDIS, a bit of information about internal and external reviews, the link to the change of situation form, and then a link to the growing space. So I actually did my support coordination training under the growing space 5 years ago. Sam Payer, who owns Growing Space, she's an absolute wealth of knowledge. She's probably one of the most knowledgeable support coordinations in Australia. And she has a really active Facebook group, and she has a library in the website that you can pay an annual membership, and it's got heaps of resources, and you can claim the membership through your NDIS funding. So that's definitely worth checking out. Okay, and now we've got time for some questions.
Okie dokie. Hi guys, for those of you who don't know me or missed me at the start of the presentation, my name is Paul and I am from NAPA Centre. Thank you for that, Tammy. That was wonderful as per usual. But everyone knows that usually the great nuggets of information now comes from the questions and the Q&As that get submitted from the punters. So I'm going to start feeding some questions through to you that have come through during your presentation, and we'll start with those. But for those of you online, please stay online because there's a lot of great information still to come. But please submit your questions through the chat functionality of the Microsoft Teams. So you should see at the top of your screen a little chat bubble, and you can go in there and you can submit a question in there. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, please don't be too specific about your particular circumstances with your child. We're probably not going to have the chance to go into anything too individually based. But if there is something of general that the majority of people online may benefit from hearing Tammy's answer to and hearing her knowledge on, then please just pop it in there. So I'm going to start by feeding some questions through to you, and I'll start curating those questions and sending them through to you. So the first one I want to send your way, Tammy, is around a couple of questions around the functional capacity assessment, which you talked about at the start. Who can do the functional capacity assessments, and can they be done on all aged children, like younger children as well?
Yeah, so often functional capacity assessments are done by occupational therapists, but I've seen them done by physios, and I've also seen them done by social workers. So it doesn't have to specifically be done by an occupational therapist, but that does seem to be the therapy provider that does them mostly. You know, like there's quite a difference between a good functional capacity assessment and a not so good one. So my recommendation would be to ask in your local Facebook groups for recommendations, because a kick-ass functional capacity assessment is worth its weight in gold. So I definitely would be trying to get some recommendations around that. What was the second part of the question, Paul?
And can they be done for all ages?
Yes, they can. Yes.
Yes, any age. Okay, cool. And do you recommend that they are done if your child is seeing OT, speechy, psych, and physio? Do you recommend getting as many different functional assessments from each of those individual therapists contributing, or do we concentrate on one?
No, so you have one therapist that does a functional capacity assessment, and I mean, everyone does it a little bit different, but predominantly they have an assessment tool that they use. That a lot of them use the Vinelands, but some of them have used different ones. And they do an observation of the child either in the home or in the community. They ask a lot of questions of the parents just to get an understanding. They look at all the different developmental domains, and then a functional capacity assessment will, at the end, have recommendations of all of the supports that should go in the next NDIS plan. So it should include everything. So whether there should be any core supports, whether there should be any consumables, what therapists, I mean, they might contact the current providers just to get a bit of input on how often do you think, you know, how many speech sessions do you think that they're going to need in the next 12 months? But you don't get a functional capacity assessment from every therapist. Every therapist involved should provide a progress report and their own recommendations for their modality. And some therapists will include, if they're really passionate that, oh look, this family's really struggling, this family really needs support work, like they can put their own recommendations in their own report. But the functional capacity assessment is really the gold standard. Like it will trump everything else that's provided. That's why it's so important. And yeah, that's why I've kind of recognised recently that if you don't have a functional capacity assessment, it's almost like they just kind of negate all of the other assessments and say, well, actually, we don't really know where this person is. And so, I mean, the one that I had that was slashed recently, they had about 40,000 in core. They had about 20-odd thousand in capacity daily living, and they had about 20,000 in improved relationships. They came back with a plan of $8,000 in CB daily living, and that's it. Didn't even get any support coordination funding. And basically the way that I read that is that they've given us enough funding to do a functional capacity assessment and a little bit of therapy to put in for a reassessment. Yeah, so they're basically forcing the family to do a functional capacity assessment and not giving them any other funding until that's done, which I think is really, really the wrong, really unfair on the family. But that's kind of, I mean, you see it quite often when people first come on the scheme that they'll just get a really small plan and enough funding to do a functional capacity assessment. It's because there hasn't been enough evidence for them to decide how much funding should go in the first plan. So they'll basically, here's some funding to do the assessment, come back when you've got that, and we'll work out what the next plan will be.
Okay, yeah. Great. And with the functional assessment, would you recommend a full one and then an update each year?
If you're able to use the same therapist, then yes, you can do that. But if that therapist is no longer available, and you have to use a different therapist, then usually they will want to do a full one again. But yes, certainly you can get an update if you're using the same therapist. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. At what age, so something a little bit more specific now, at what age are you able to claim or purchase continence aids with your funding?
Yeah, this one really frustrates me. Most of them will say 5 years of age. Most LACs and planners will say, we don't fund under 5. I think it's probably possible to get funding at 4, but you would need some pretty solid evidence, and you'd probably need to pay for a continence assessment yourself to get that funded. They won't automatically fund under 5. You'd have to have some pretty solid evidence to get it funded younger than that. But 5 is usually the age that they will start looking at continence.
You're on mute, Paul.
Yep. Sorry. Thank you, guys. In regards to recreation, how about one-on-one swimming lessons? The gap between group and private lessons, if it's linked to a goal around water safety?
Yeah, so in the past, that was really quite easy to get funded. For some reason, they've really clamped down on it, and it's really hard to get it funded specifically in the plan now. But if you have some core funding, there's no reason why you can't use your core funding to claim it. It's just getting it specifically added into the plan is really super difficult now.
And what about that question around the gap between group and private?
Yeah, so that's what they used to fund pretty easily, was the gap. But now, yeah, it's really super hard because, you know, they just come back and say, oh, you know, swimming lessons is every parent's responsibility and that kind of thing. Yeah, super frustrating. But if you have some core funding or you have some capacity, social and community, there's no reason why you can't use the funding to claim that gap.
Okay, great. All right, shifting gears now and moving over to home modifications. Bree says, I've heard a rumour that you could only have this done, home mods funded once every 10 years. Is that true?
I'm not actually sure on the time frame, but certainly, I mean, I thought that, yeah, I would actually have to research that and come back to you, but I know there is definitely restrictions around that, because basically once they've paid, I mean, I guess it's probably different for a child living at home, and then once that child leaves home, I'm sure they would fund that again for them to move out of home, but certainly once they've moved out of home, they're less likely to fund it again. Yeah, so, but what the actual rules are around that, I would have to look that up.
Have you ever had any circumstances where the parents have moved house and therefore, you know, needed bathroom modifications done in the second house? Have you ever been through that experience with one of your kids?
I haven't had a client in that particular position, but my understanding is that if you choose to move, then I think it becomes your responsibility after that. Like, I think that, yeah, that's my understanding, is that they will only fund it as a one-off.
Okay, great. All right. Jessica asks, what is the turnaround time for a mid-cost review when getting it added to a plan but not changing the rest of the plan?
Yeah, look, I mean, and there's time frames for all of these things, but NDIS just never seem to stick to their own time frame. So it's just such a piece of string. It's really impossible to say. And it really does depend on, you know, like, I guess each area has their own team that deals with that, and it depends on how many applications they're dealing with at the time. So yeah, there's kind of no real answer to that one, unfortunately.
Okay, great. You mentioned one of the trends that you saw were about the renewal of plans and the length of plans. But I've got someone asking, can you actually request a 2 or 3 year plan. This person has asked but has been told twice that they have to do it yearly. Their son, for context, is 4 at the time of reassessment.
Yeah, so the under 7s, they were that up until recently, they were only offering 12-month plans to early childhood early intervention. And I guess because at such a young age, their needs can change fairly quickly. But just in the last few months, I have had a couple of under 7s that have had been offered a 2-year plan. So I think there has been some shift in that thinking. So my suggestion would be just keep asking each time. Just say you want a 2-year plan. Yeah, I would keep asking the question.
Okay, great. I'm not sure what this name is, but this person asks, are there any tips for your very first planning meeting? We have just been approved and about to have our first planning meeting.
Yes, I can probably send Paul some pre-planning tools that I would normally send out to people going for their first meeting, because there's a booklet that is on the NDIS website that you can fill in, which is really helpful, because everything that you put in the booklet is often the things that will be asked in the planning meeting. So it just makes the planning meeting go a bit more smoothly if you already have that booklet filled out. It's also good to have your goals written out already, so you can have 2 short-term goals and up to 5 medium to long-term goals, so you can have a maximum of 7 goals. I can send some sample goals through to Paul. You have to have an understanding of self-managed, plan managed and agency managed, because they will ask you how you want your funding managed in the planning meeting. And then my other tip is that they will likely want to do what's called a PEDICAT assessment. And that's like a questionnaire where they will ask certain questions about the capability of your child, and you need to tell them whether they don't need help, they need a little bit of help, they need a lot of help. I think there's actually 5 different criteria, but you have to tell them. So it might be things like, can they open a chip packet? Can they do up the buttons on their shirt? The thing to remember is that even if you're having to remind them or verbally prompt them, they're not doing it independently. So what you need to visualize is, if that child was trying to do that activity and you weren't in the room, could they do it? Because often we don't realize how much help we give, even if we're not physically helping. We might be talking through the steps, or or doing hand over hand, so it's just really important that you answer those questions as accurately as possible, because the result of that questionnaire does actually equate to how much therapy funding you likely will get in your first plan. So yeah, that's my advice, is to be really mindful of how you answer those questions.
Great tips. Kendall's asking, if given the option, is it better to go for a 2-year plan over a 12-month plan?
In my mind, I think absolutely. I would honestly recommend anyone take a 2 or 3 year plan, because you're not having to do the 12-monthly review. You save money because you're not having to have all those reports done at the 12-month mark. If everything's going along, then I think definitely going for a 2-year plan is the way to go. With the knowledge that if something does change in that 2-year period, you can still ask for a change of situation and have a plan review meeting if it's needed.
Great. Chris is asking, if you're self-managed, can you purchase from overseas companies?
Yes, you can. You don't necessarily, obviously they won't have an ABN, but you do need an invoice or a receipt. And then if you, for example, if you buy something from America and you pay for it in American dollars, all I would do is work out what the exchange rate is on the day that you purchase that item, and then on the invoice put the conversion rate and how much that equates to in Australian dollars, and then you just claim the Australian dollars amount. But if you put all that information on the invoice, if you get audited, then you can show why you claimed that amount on that day.
Perfect, thank you. Brooke's asking, if low-cost items are specifically itemised on the plan, do you only buy those items or can you change as needed throughout the year?
No, so because core is fully flexible, unless it's a stated support, if it says it's a stated support, then you can only purchase, use the funding as stated. But I don't think I've ever seen consumables as stated. So even though they may have listed what was funded in the plan, core is fully flexible, so you don't have to specifically buy those items. You can choose what items you want to buy with the consumables, or you could even use some of that funding for a support worker, or because core is fully flexible, you treat the core budget as a whole amount, if you like, and you work out how you're going to use that budget within core.
Right. All right, Jane's asking, can you share your views on therapy assistance? I've heard mixed NDIS guidelines. Can we use the support worker as a therapy assistant? And is that under capacity building?
Great question. Okay, so if you use a therapy assistant, then they have to be supervised by a therapist, because therapy assistants have to come under the insurance of the qualified therapist. I think it's a great option if you are wanting to stretch your therapy budget to have a therapy assistant, and yeah, I think that it can be a good option as long as you find the right person. There is a line, so there is a therapy assistant line item in capacity building daily living, but there's also a line item called individual skill development, and that particular line item is specifically for a support worker. But because it is a capacity building line, my recommendation would be that, so the support worker doesn't have to come under a therapist, but I would suggest that that's the best way to go, is that they're having some guidance from a therapist. But unlike the therapy assistant has to be supervised by a therapist, the support worker doesn't necessarily need to be. But certainly, if you don't have enough hours in core funding, or you don't have any support worker hours in core funding and you would like to use a support worker, you can use that line item in CB daily living, but you need to be able to show that it's not just, like taking them out of community. You're not using it for respite, it is to build their capacity. But honestly, that's not hard to do. Like if you were taking them out into the community, you could be teaching them how to catch public transport, or building their social skills, or like there's lots of ways that you can build capacity building into support worker shifts. But yeah, you'd need to be able to show that the support worker was working on developing skills in some way.
Okay, great. All right, guys, we're approaching the end of our session tonight, so I'm just going to go through the last few questions that we've got here, so that everyone can get on with their night. All right, so Samara's asking, regarding low-cost AT, does the specialist advice need to be in writing, i.e. via email or letter?
I mean, that would be my recommendation. I mean, certainly if you had a face-to-face meeting with them, that would be considered seeking specialist advice. But I would suggest having something in writing, like an email is fine, in case you're audited. Yeah, that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Nick, I'm going to answer yours and say you can get a functional capacity assessment done at NAPA. Brooke's asking, what are your tips for getting support coordination approved for early intervention plans? We were rejected for a 2-year-old because I have been doing it all myself successfully for the last 2 years.
Yeah, look, it's It's actually quite difficult to get it in under 7s. It's not impossible though. I definitely have some clients who are under 7. Support coordination as a whole is often only funded if there's complexities. So if there's more than one family member with an NDIS plan, for example, or if it's you know, a single parent, or yeah, there's usually some complexity, and certainly if there's already services in place, they're less likely to fund support coordination. Look, I don't think there's any magic wand, to be honest. It's just a matter of, yeah, trying to justify why you think that you need support coordination. Certainly for some of the families that I've advocated it for, if English is a second language, often they really find the NDIS, I mean, everybody finds it hard to navigate, but if English is your second language, it's even harder. And certainly if there's 2 or more participants with NDIS funding, that can be a lot to navigate. Yeah, there's no kind of magic wand, unfortunately. You've just got to try and put your best argument forward.
Okay, great. I've got 3 final questions and then we'll call it a night. Just heading back to that question that we just had about the therapy assistants. Do you mean that the therapy assistant has to be under a therapist? Sorry, when you say they need to be under a therapist, do you mean that they need to be employed by them or just receive training by them when they join in on a child's therapy session?
They need to be employed by the therapist because they need to be covered by their insurance.
Yeah. Okay. Great, makes sense. Okay, Bree's asking, if you run out of funding in one bucket, for example, therapy, can you take it from core and vice versa? We all want to know that answer.
Yeah, so it's kind of not a black and white answer though. At the moment in core, there are some therapy line items that were added in during COVID, but they haven't been removed. And personally, I think if you've run out of therapy funds and you are happy to use your core funding for therapy, I don't really see that it's an issue. And certainly if you're self-managing, I think it's a lot easier to do that. But what I have noticed is that some plan managers will allow you to do that and some won't. So then it just comes down to the individual plan managers. So unfortunately, there's no kind of real, I mean, every price guide, we keep expecting them to take those line items out and they haven't. So people just kind of keep using them. And it's hard to know, I mean, because prior to COVID, there were all these promises about they were going to make all the budgets a lot more flexible. So there were, so that it didn't matter if you ran out of funding in one budget, you could use another budget, but they just never followed through on that. And so, yeah, it's difficult to know. But what I think you just have to make a decision on what you think is best. So if you run out of core funding, then as I've just explained before, there is a line item in core for support workers. So you can use that line, but you just need to be mindful that you need to be able to show that that support worker is working on skill development.
Okay, great. And final question, do you need to ask for support worker funding in a review?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, if you feel that you desperately need support worker funding and you can't wait until the end of plan review, then you can always do a change in situation. But my recommendation would be to try and get as much evidence and support as you can. So it would need to be recommended in the functional capacity assessment. You would need to get, maybe a support letter from the school, any of the therapists that are involved, support letter from specialists or GP, like as many supports letters as you can, saying that this family really does need support work, because you get all sorts of different answers. Like I've been in plan review meetings where they've said, oh, we don't fund core supports until they turn 18. And then some will say, oh, we never give core supports until they turn 12 or 13. You know, and I know 2-year-olds that have core support funding. So it just really does depend on the LAC or the planner that you have the meeting with and what their perception is about when core supports should come into play. So it's just about having as much evidence as you can supporting why you need core support funding.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so thank you, everybody. That's the end of our questions for tonight. I just want to take this opportunity to send a big shout out and thank you to Tammy for her time tonight, for answering all those questions and for that presentation. I'm getting lots of thank yous through on the messages here, Tammy. I can see them all pouring through. What I do say to you, and what I said at the start of the presentation tonight, guys, obviously everyone's situation with the NDIS and their understanding is very, very different. So please, if you are after advocacy or support during your reviews, you can reach out to a local support coordinator, or Tammy's absolutely available for you. She's Perth-based, but she has clients all over Australia. So please reach out to her. Her details again are on Facebook, so facebook.com/inclusionss. Her company is called Inclusion Support Solutions, and you can email her anytime at contact, CONTACT, at inclusionss.com.au. So again, thank you very much. Just a reminder that I will send through a link to the presentation as well as the slides from tonight's presentation, and Tammy's promised a couple of things that she's going to send through as well. So I'll wait for her to send me through those in the next day, and I will send that through to everyone who's on the call tonight. I will send that out to the email address that you registered through via Eventbrite. And whilst I'm talking about Eventbrite, I'll just do a shout out to the fact that our next NAPA Nights is on Tuesday, May 16th, and is all about the Carer Gateway, which is all about accessing government-funded supports that can help you as the parent or the carer of your child with supports that you need. So it's shifting the focus onto you, not necessarily onto your child, but shifting the focus to you. There's a lot of resources and funding that you can access to assist you in your journey as a special needs parent as well. So that will be the focus of our next NAPA Nights, which will be held on Tuesday, May 16th. You can grab your free tickets to that via the same way you got your tickets to this evening, via Eventbrite. Just go to Eventbrite and search under NAPA Nights. A big thank you, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the registrations and the names on there. And thank you for all your questions. And we look forward to seeing you on our next NAPA Nights. But again, thank you to Tammy for her time tonight. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.